The Kansas prairie stretched out in every direction, a vast sea of whispering grass under an endless bowl of sky. In the middle of this great expanse was a small, neatly kept ranch, and in the middle of that ranch lived a man named Silas. He was a rancher in his late 20s, a man of quiet habits and a lonely heart. His days were filled with the honest work of mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and fighting back the wildness that always sought to reclaim the land. His evenings were spent in a silence that was broken only by the crackle of the fire and the lowing of the cows. He was a good man, a kind man, but the solitude of his life had begun to weigh on him like a heavy coat. One evening, after a particularly long and quiet day, Silas had done something that felt both daring and desperate. He had written a letter in response to an advertisement in a newspaper from the East. The ad was placed by a woman seeking a new life as a mail-order bride. Silas, with his simple and hopeful heart, had pictured a very specific kind of woman. He dreamed of a wife who was gentle. In his mind, gentle meant small in stature, with a soft voice that would not break the prairie's silence too harshly, and delicate hands that would be suited for keeping a home rather than wrestling with the harshness of the land. He began to write to a woman named Abigail. The letters that traveled back and forth between Kansas and the distant city became the brightest part of Silas's life. Abigail's words were thoughtful and kind. She wrote of her faith in God, of her love for simple things, and of her desire for a life of purpose and partnership. She seemed, on paper, to be the very picture of the gentle spirit he had been praying for. Silas would read her letters by lamplight, and his imagination would paint a picture of a petite, graceful woman who would need his protection and whose presence would soften the hard edges of his world. He thanked God every night for leading him to this gentle answer to his prayers. The day the stagecoach was due to arrive felt like the most important day of Silas's life. He put on his best shirt, the one without any holes or stains from work. He brushed his hat until the dust was gone. His heart beat with a nervous, joyful rhythm as he picked a small bouquet of wild blue flax and purple coneflowers that grew near his cabin. He wanted everything to be perfect for his gentle Abigail. The sun was high and bright as he rode into the small town of Oak Creek. He stood by the dusty road, the flowers held tightly in his hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon where a cloud of dust signaled the approaching stagecoach. The coach rolled in with a creak of wood and a jingle of harnesses, coming to a stop in a cloud of dust that made Silas cough and blink. The doors swung open. A man in a suit stepped out, then a woman with a child. Silas's breath caught in his chest. And then Abigail appeared. She had to duck her head low to clear the doorway of the coach. When she straightened up, Silas felt his smile freeze and then slowly fade from his face. The woman standing before him was not small. She was, in fact, a giant of a woman. She stood a full head taller than Silas himself. Her shoulders were broad and strong, and her hands, which held a small worn suitcase, were large and looked capable of serious work. Her dress was simple and clean, but it could not hide her powerful frame. This was not the delicate vision he had carried in his mind for all these weeks. This was not the gentle wife he had prayed for. A storm of confusion and disappointment raged inside him. All his careful plans and dreams seemed to shatter in that single moment. Abigail took a step toward him, a hesitant but hopeful look in her kind eyes. "Silas?" she asked, her voice softer than he expected, but it barely registered. Silas stumbled backward a step, as if her size alone were a force pushing him away. The wildflowers in his hand felt foolish and small. I, he stammered, his face growing hot with embarrassment and a sudden, unfair anger. "There has been a mistake," he finally managed to say, his voice rough. You are not what I was waiting for. I cannot do this." He saw the light in her eyes extinguish like a snuffed candle. Her hopeful expression crumpled into one of deep hurt and shame. She straightened her back, holding herself with a dignity that made Silas feel very small indeed. "I see," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I am sorry to have disappointed you." Without another word, Silas turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the street, a tall, solitary figure amidst her luggage and the curious stares of the townsfolk. He tossed the little bouquet of flowers into the dust beside the road. The ride back to his ranch was a blur of misery. The guilt began to sink its claws into him almost immediately. He had been cruel. He had judged a person solely by the way they looked on the outside, without any regard for the soul he had come to know through her letters. That evening, the walls of his cabin felt like they were closing in on him. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was accusing. He could not eat. He could not rest. The image of Abigail's hurt face haunted him. He knew in his heart he had committed a great wrong. Driven by a need for guidance, he saddled his horse and rode back into town under the cover of darkness, going straight to the small house where Pastor Jones lived. The pastor, an older man with a calm and wise demeanor, listened patiently as Silas poured out the whole story: his loneliness, his prayers, his specific dream of a gentle wife, and his harsh rejection of the woman who had arrived. When Silas finished, his head in his hands, the pastor was quiet for a long moment. "Silas," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "You asked God for a gentle wife, and it seems He sent you one. But you decided for God what that gentleness should look like. You wanted a gentle appearance, and you rejected a gentle heart because it came in a strong container. Perhaps God's plan was bigger than your own. Perhaps the answer to your prayer was standing right in front of you, and you were too busy looking at the outside to see the blessing on the inside." The pastor's words hit Silas with the force of a physical blow. He saw the truth in them with painful clarity. He had been so focused on his own narrow idea of what was good that he had thrown away a gift from God. He had hurt a good woman because she did not fit the picture in his head. Right there in the pastor's quiet parlor, Silas bowed his head and prayed a prayer of true sorrow, asking God for forgiveness for his pride and his shallow heart. And then he asked for something else, something that felt almost too much to hope for. He asked for a second chance. The morning sun had never felt so accusing as it did the next day, its bright rays illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air of Silas's cabin, each one seeming to whisper of his failure. The memory of Abigail's face, the hopeful light dying in her eyes, was a brand on his conscience. Pastor Jones's words echoed in his mind, a relentless bell tolling his foolishness. He had prayed for a sign, for guidance, and it had arrived on a stagecoach, tall and strong, and he had sent it away. A heavy shame settled in his stomach, making the thought of food impossible. He knew that seeking her out would be the hardest thing he had ever done, far harder than breaking the toughest piece of land, but it was a necessary task, a debt he owed to his own soul and to the woman he had wronged. He rode back into town with a heart full of dread, his hat pulled low against the sun and his own humiliation. He inquired at the general store, his voice a low mumble, and was directed to the town's only boarding house, a whitewashed building with a small porch, run by a stern-looking widow named Mrs. Peabody. He found Abigail there, not inside but sitting on a bench in the small, sparse garden at the side of the house, her posture straight and her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the prairie as if looking for an answer in its vast emptiness. She looked up as he approached, and her expression was not angry but guarded, a quiet fortress around the hurt he had caused. Silas stopped a few feet from her, removing his hat and holding it nervously in his hands. He did not try to make excuses. The words he had practiced on the ride over fled his mind, leaving only the raw, simple truth. "Abigail," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "What I did yesterday was the most shameful act of my life. I was a prideful and foolish man. I judged you with my eyes and not with the heart that had already begun to know you through your letters. I asked God for a gentle wife, and He sent me one, and I was too blind to see it. My dream was small and you are so much more. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am begging for a chance to make it right. Not to marry, not now, but to properly court you. To truly see the woman I was too much of a coward to welcome." Abigail watched him, her gaze steady and thoughtful. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly around the brim of his hat. She had prepared herself to find passage back east, to carry the humiliation with her forever. This humble apology was unexpected. After a long silence that stretched between them, she gave a slow, careful nod. "A courtship is a fair request, Silas," she said, her voice still soft, but now layered with a cautious strength. "I believe in second chances. They are, after all, a foundation of our faith." And so their courtship began. It was awkward at first, a series of stiff, polite conversations on Mrs. Peabody's porch. Silas brought her small, thoughtful gifts, not flowers, but a book of poetry he had ordered years ago and never opened, a small, carved wooden bird he had whittled himself. He began to share pieces of his life, telling her about the struggles and small triumphs of ranching, about his parents who had passed on, about his dream of building a family that would fill this wide, empty land with love and laughter. Abigail, in turn, began to slowly lower her walls. She told him of her life in the crowded city, of a father who had left and a mother who had fallen ill, of how she had become the sole support for her younger siblings from a young age. "My strength was not a choice at first," she explained one afternoon as they walked slowly along the edge of town. "It was a necessity. There was no one else to carry the coal, to lift my mother, to work the long hours in the mill to put food on the table. I learned to be strong because love demanded it of me. In that moment, Silas saw her not as a giant woman, but as a devoted daughter and a protective sister. He saw that her strength was not the opposite of gentleness, but its fierce and loyal guardian. He began to see the profound beauty in her capable hands, the same hands that had worked so hard for those she loved. One day he took her to his ranch. He showed her the land not with pride of ownership, but with a sense of shared purpose. He pointed out the creek where the cattle drank, the stand of cottonwood trees that provided shade, the patch of land where he hoped to one day plant a proper garden. Abigail did not just observe. She asked intelligent questions about the soil, the water supply, the breeding of the cattle. Her eyes, he noticed, missed nothing. Later that week, they visited Mrs. Peabody again, and the older woman mentioned her fence was falling down and she had no one to fix it. Before Silas could even offer, Abigail had taken off her shawl, rolled up the sleeves of her dress, and was setting the posts straight with a strength and skill that left both Silas and Mrs. Peabody in awe. As she worked, her face was set in concentration, but there was no strain, only a quiet competence. Silas did not feel embarrassed or threatened. He felt a surge of admiration. This was a partner. This was a woman whose strength would build a life with him, not one he would have to build a life around. Their conversations deepened, moving from their past to their hopes, their shared faith, their beliefs about the world. They discovered a shared sense of humor, and laughter began to come easily between them, a sound that chased away the last ghosts of their awkward beginning. Silas found himself eagerly anticipating their time together, not to fulfill a duty, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. The picture of the small, delicate wife he had once dreamed of faded completely, replaced by the vibrant, real and wonderful presence of Abigail. He loved the sound of her voice, the wisdom in her words, the kindness in her actions, and the steadfast strength that was now so clearly a part of her beautiful spirit. One evening, as they sat on the bench watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of orange and purple, Silas knew his heart was full and his mind was clear. He turned to her, taking her strong, capable hand in his. "Abigail," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I started this by looking for a wife I thought I wanted. But through knowing you, I have found the partner God always intended for me. You are the strongest and gentlest soul I have ever known. My life is better with you in it. Will you do me the greatest honor and become my wife?" A beautiful smile spread across Abigail's face, a smile that reached her eyes and lit them from within. She squeezed his hand. "Yes, Silas," she said without a moment's hesitation. "I will." Their wedding was a simple, joyful affair in the small church, surrounded by the few townsfolk who had become their friends, like Pastor Jones and Mrs. Peabody. They pledged their lives to each other before God, their vows not just promises, but a testament to the second chance they had both been given. When Silas looked at his bride, he did not see her height or her strength. He saw only the immense love and gratitude in his own heart for the woman who had taught him how to see. The life that blossomed on Silas's ranch in the months that followed was a testament to the power of a second chance and a love built on a true foundation. The cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, was now filled with the warm sounds of partnership. Abigail's presence transformed the rooms, not just with her physical strength that helped with every chore, but with a spirit of grace that made the simple wooden structure a home. She worked alongside Silas in the fields, her endurance a perfect match for the demanding labor, and in the evenings her gentle hands would prepare their meal while Silas tended to the animals. They were a team, their love for each other and their shared faith in God the sturdy cornerstones upon which they built each new day. The townsfolk of Oak Creek, who had witnessed their rocky beginning, now saw them as an example of a marriage that worked, a partnership where respect and affection grew stronger with each passing season. A year after their wedding, a new and profound joy settled upon the ranch. Abigail was expecting a child. The news filled both their hearts with a happiness so immense it was almost frightening. Silas would often find himself just watching his wife, his heart swelling with a love so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. He saw the future unfolding before them, a child's laughter echoing in the cabin, a family to fill the vastness of the prairie. They spent many evenings talking about their hopes for their baby, praying together for a safe delivery and a healthy child, their hands intertwined, their faith a shared shield against the natural fears that accompanied such a momentous event. They prepared a small cradle, which Silas carved with extra care, each curl of wood shaving a symbol of his love and anticipation. When the time came for the baby to be born, it arrived not with the gentle ease of a prairie sunrise, but with the sudden fury of a summer storm. The labor was long and difficult. The town's doctor was summoned, and Mrs. Peabody came to help, her face etched with concern as the hours dragged on. Inside the bedroom, Abigail fought with a courage that left everyone in awe. She used the same deep strength that had carried her through a hard life, the same fortitude that had borne her across the country and through a painful rejection, to now bring her child into the world. Silas never left her side, his face pale but his resolve steady. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and prayed aloud, his voice a steady anchor in the turbulent room, calling upon the God who had brought them together to now see them safely through this trial. After what felt like an eternity, a new, strong cry joined the sounds of the struggle, piercing the tense air of the cabin. It was the sound of victory, of life, of a miracle. The doctor announced the arrival of a healthy baby boy. Exhausted but radiant, Abigail looked at Silas, a tear tracing a path through her sweat-dampened hair. Mrs. Peabody gently cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Abigail's waiting arms. As Silas looked down at his son, his own tears finally fell, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love so profound it defied all words. The baby's face was red and tiny, his hands curled into miniature fists, and in that moment, Silas understood the full circle of God's plan. He had prayed for a gentle wife, and God had sent him Abigail, whose gentle heart was housed in a vessel of immense strength, the very strength that had just safely delivered his son into his arms. They named their son Josiah, a name that means God supports. It was the perfect name, for they felt God's supporting hand through every step of their journey, from the painful lesson of rejection to the hard-won joy of this moment. In the quiet days that followed, as Silas sat on the edge of their bed watching Abigail nurse their son, he was overcome with a sense of completion. He thought of the man he had been, the one who had stood by the stagecoach with a narrow heart and a bouquet of judgment. He had thought he knew what he needed, but God had known what he truly needed. He needed a partner, a helper, a woman whose strength would be the rock for their family and whose gentleness would be its comfort. He had almost sent this entire future away because it did not match the small picture in his mind. The story of Silas and Abigail became a quiet legend in Oak Creek, not told with great fanfare, but shared as a reminder of God's mysterious and wonderful ways. Their life together was a beautiful, ongoing testimony. They faced hardships as all people do, but they faced them together with faith as their guide. Their love, tested and proven true, only deepened with the years. They were blessed with more children, and the ranch echoed with the sounds of a large and loving family. They taught their children by word and by example to look for the heart in others, to be slow to judge, and to always trust that God's plan is greater than their own. Their forever after was not a life without trouble, but a life filled with a love that could withstand any storm, a love that had been waiting for them just beyond a moment of foolishness, a love that was, in the end, far greater than either of them could have ever dreamed on their own. If you have been touched by the story of Silas and Abigail, a story of second chances and seeing the true beauty within, then we invite you to join our community. By subscribing to our channel, you ensure you will not miss the next heartfelt tale of faith, love, and the lessons learned on the frontier. Each story is crafted to bring a message of hope and to remind us of the important values that guide our lives. Your subscription helps us to continue sharing these narratives. We have so many more stories to share with you, and we would be honored to have you along for the journey. Subscribe now and let us continue to explore the enduring power of love and faith together.